So I just wanted to make a quick video before I go to bed. I'm just tired, but wasn't a comment. One guy was saying that America has always been for freedom of religion, including Christianity, which is the majority religion and all its, which has been the majority religion and all its forms in the USA. And I said, America is conceived in Christian covenant. It's not just another religion. It's the basis for the founding identity for the chosen nation, God's American Israel. Because the idea is that, the idea is that before 1776, right, 1726, I think it was, the spirit of the Great Awakening, even the Pilgrims, right, the Mayflower Compact, Plymouth, all the compacts, right, they're all covenants, strictly Christian, right, specifically Protestant, but nonetheless Christian, right, for Christ. Even some of the signers were covenanters, and different types of Christians as well, but mainly covenanters and covenantal-minded people. The Reformed Church have been, the most influence on the American founding as far as religion and stuff, and at least from what I can tell. There's one guy, because the idea was that I was saying is that America is conceived not just in godly liberty, but in godly covenant and godly identity. And so when I was rambling in my previous video, I think I called it American Orthodoxy, well, America as Second Israel. I said that's not a mythology. That's not a mythology. That's just basically biblical theology. How the covenant nation, a covenant people, is in covenant with God through Jesus, right? And so how Jesus establishes the church. So the church is of his heavenly flesh, right? His redeemed humanity from the new Adam. The second Adam is the new Adam, right? Or the new Israel, or the Israel of God, the faithful one. Basically, that it's rooted in covenanting. It's rooted in covenant in Christ, right? And so that's why it's just the Bible, the biblical, right, idea that I think even the Roman Church and the Orthodox Church understand that. And I think maybe even some early forms of Protestantism, I think as well. I don't know, but lately it's not believed. They think that the state of Israel is the true Israel, even though they don't have no covenant with Jesus, right? They don't have a covenant with Christ. And so that would technically be disobedient Israel, basically. So I don't want to ramble, but the other guy responded with, this guy was responding to me, he said, the Constitution is a secular document. The laws written in there from the First Amendment onwards wouldn't be allowed by biblical law. Okay, and so and then another guy says Christianity was what created the Inquisition and witch burning and illiteracy, were they though a priest saying magic words will get rid of the plague. If Christianity had dominance, it would crush everyone else's beliefs that happened under Constantine, and there was book burning. And he quotes to me, this quote, as the government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion, as it has in itself no character of enmity against the laws, religion, or tranquility of Muslims, and as the said states never entered into any war or act of hostility against any Mohammedan nation, it is declared by the parties that no pretext arising from religious opinions shall ever produce an interruption of the harmony existing between the two countries. Adam submitted and signed the Treaty of Tripoli, 1797. And then I think I made a video about that quote, but I'll just give you my response to that person. When John Adams said, the Hebrews have done more to civilize men than any other nation, a If I were an atheist and believed blind eternal fate, I should still believe that fate had ordained the Jews to be the most essential instrument for civilizing the nations. That's John Adams. And then I told him that our form of government, right, even though it's not established upon any particular Christian religion, since predominantly the Christian religion was monarchian, right? And so I said our form of government, identity, and reality comes from the Bible. Therefore, our form of government is still Bible-based. And then I quoted another source from the Inquirer, the Bible's key role in the American founding. This is what I said to him, quoting this source. A popular view among Americans, for example, was that the Hebrew, quote, republic, end quote, described in the scriptures was a model of and divine precedent for a republican government well designed to promote political prosperity. The founders were well aware that ideas like republicanism found expression in traditions apart from the Hebrew experience and studied these traditions, both ancient and modern. The republic described in the Hebrew scriptures, however, reassured pious Americans that republicanism was a political system that enjoyed divine favor. More important than a model for republicanism, some founders thought the Bible was an indispensable handbook for Republican citizenship. In particular, the Bible, more than any other source, taught the civic virtues required of citizens in the a regime of political self-government. A self-governing people, in short, had to be a virtuous, disciplined people who were controlled from within by an internal moral compass, which would replace external control by an authoritarian ruler's whip and rod. And the Bible, many believed, was the wellspring of the essential civic virtue. This prompted John Adams to describe the Bible as, quote, the most Republican book in the world, end quote. And I responded against the same person. I quoted Thomas Jefferson. I said, had the doctrines of Jesus been preached always as pure as they came from his lips, the whole civilized world would now have been Christians. That's Thomas Jefferson, 1829. Memoir, Correspondence, and Miscellaneous from the Papers of Thomas Jefferson, page 349. And then I quoted once again, this time from Joseph Story, the author, Commentaries on the Constitution. It says the real object of the First Amendment was not to countenance, much less to advance Mohammedanism or Judaism or infidelity by prostrating Christianity, but to exclude all rivalry among Christian sects and to prevent any national ecclesiastical patronage of the national government. And I guess this person didn't respond afterwards. And that's basically, in summation, these progressive types or these secular types, these anti-Christian types, that's basically all they depend on is some quotes from a founding father who may be saying something that sounds anti-Christian, whether it be critiquing the deity of Jesus or the Trinity, or not believing in the Bible's inspiration and things like that. Things that normally you wouldn't consider Christian, right? But it doesn't justify godless secularism. You know, like Quakers consider themselves Christians, and yet they're anti-Christian institution and oath-making, right? Don't believe in that, and yet they consider themselves Christian, and so they're not pro-godlessness. And so it's just assumed that pro-godless secularism is what these, people like Thomas Jefferson and stuff like that, are the so-called theist founders, that they somehow favor secular humanism, which is not true. I mean, even Thomas Paine came from Quakerism, so him being against institutional Christianity and things like that may not be exclusively the theism or humanism, right? It may also have to do with the type of Christianity he came from. In this Kindle book that I bought, it says, "Who is the king in America?" Yeah, it says, "Who is the king in America, and who are the counselors to the king? An overview of 6,000 years of history and why America is unique." Just want to quote from the chapter, Ancient Israel, showing you that the founders agreed with this identity. Israel of God, or in America. And so Jefferson stated in his second inaugural, March 4th, 1805, he says, I shall need too the favor of that being in whose hands we are, who led our forefathers as Israel of old from their native land and planted them in a country flowing with all the necessities and comforts of life. And it quotes Justice John Jay stated September 8, 1777. This is the many remarkable and unexpected means and events by which our wants have been supplied and our enemies repelled are such strong and striking proofs of the interposition of heaven, that our having been delivered from the threatening bondage of Britain ought, like the emancipation of the Jews from Egyptian servitude, to be forever ascribed to its true cause. And then George Washington wrote to the Hebrew congregations of the city of Savannah, Georgia, 1790, may the same wonder-working deity who, long since, delivering the Hebrews from the Egyptian oppressors, planted them in the promised land, whose providential agency has lately been conspicuous in establishing these United States as an independent nation, still continue to water them with the dews of heaven, and to make the inhabitants of every denomination participate in the temporal and spiritual blessings of that people whose God is Jehovah. And then, after the Constitution was written, it needed to be ratified by 9 states to go into effect. In early 1788, 8 states had ratified it, and New Hampshire was in line to be the 9th, but disagreements caused its ratifying convention to be adjourned in February of that year. After that annual day of fasting set by the governor, New Hampshire delegates reconvened in June of 1788. This is Harvard President Reverend Samuel Langdon gave an address which was instrumental in convincing the delegates to ratify the Constitution. The Portsmouth Daily Evening Times, January 1st, 1891, acknowledged Langdon's influence, saying, by his voice and example, he contributed more perhaps than any other man to the favorable action of that body. Samuel Langdon's address, delivered June 5th, 1788, was titled, quote, The Republic of the Israelites, an Example to the American States, end quote. Afterwards, New Hampshire delegates voted to ratify the U.S. Constitution, and being the 9th state to do so, put it into effect. In his address, Samuel Langdon stated, saying, instead of the 12 tribes of Israel, we may substitute the 13 states of the American Union, and see this application plainly, that as God, in the course of his kind providence, have given you an excellent constitution of government, founded on the most rational, equitable, and liberal principles, by which all that liberty is secured, and you are empowered to make righteous laws for promoting public order and good morals, and as he has moreover given you by his Son Jesus Christ a complete revelation of his will, it will be your wisdom to adhere faithfully to the doctrines and commands of the gospel, and the practice of every public and private virtue. Langdon continued, the Israelites may be considered as a pattern to the world in all ages. Government on republican principles required laws, without which it must have degenerated immediately into absolute monarchy. How unexampled was this quick progress of the Israelites, from abject slavery, ignorance, and almost total want of order, to a national establishment, perfected in all its parts, far beyond all other kingdoms and states. From a mere mob to a well-regulated nation under a government and laws far superior to what any other nation could boast. Langdon concluded, it was a long time after the law of Moses was given before the rest of the world knew that anything of government by law. It was 600 years after Moses before Grecian republics received a very imperfect code of laws from Lycurgus. It was about 500 years from the first founding of the celebrated Roman Empire before the first laws of that empire. And then this chapter 31 goes into the Republic of the Israelites. I don't know if I want to read some of this. See, it was common knowledge. that our republic, our federalism, our constitutionalism is built upon the Bible. That's why the primary American Republican book is the Bible. And then the covenant, right? This book also goes over the covenants and stuff like that. In chapter 23, religion under each state's jurisdiction, says U.S. Supreme Court Justice Joseph Story wrote in commentaries on the Constitution in 1833, the whole power over the subject of religion is left exclusively to the state governments, to be acted upon according to their own senses of justice in the states' constitutions. So James Madison introduced the First Amendment in the first session of Congress as the fourth president. Madison appointed Joseph Story to the Supreme Court in 1811. Story served on the court for 34 years and almost single-handedly founded Harvard's Law School. The Constitution of the United States of America, Analysis and Interpretation, prepared by the Legislative Reference Service of the Library of Congress, Edward S. Corwin, Editor, U.S. Government Printing Office, Washington, 1953, page 758, stated, saying, in his commentaries on the Constitution, 1833, Justice Joseph Story asserted that the purpose of the First Amendment was not to discredit the then existing state establishments of religion, but rather, quote, to exclude from the national government all power to act on the subject, end quote. Justice Story continued, quote, in some of the states, Episcopalians constituted the predominant sect, in others, Presbyterians, in others, Congregationalists, in others, Quakers, and in others, again, there was a close numerical rivalry among contending sects. It was impossible that there should not arise perpetual strife and perpetual jealousy on the subject of ecclesiastical ascendancy. If the national government were left free to create a religious establishment, the only security was in the abolishing the power, but this alone would have been an imperfect security if it had not been followed up by the declaration of the right of the free exercise of religion. Thus, the whole power over the subject of religion is left exclusively to the state governments to be acted upon according to their own sense of justice and the state constitutions. Like a racetrack with 13 lanes, some states expanded religious freedom quickly and others slowly. This is similar to the present day, where some states limit underage drinking and others do not, and some smoking bans and others don't. Some states legalize marijuana and others don't. Some allow gambling, others do not. Some allow prostitution, Nevada and formerly Rhode Island, and others do not. This is when the Constitution and the Bill of Rights were ratified. Some states allowed more religious freedom. Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Rhode Island, and others did not. Chapter 15. This Pilgrim Pastor John Robinson. Pastor Robinson is prominently depicted kneeling in prayer in a painting hanging in the U.S. Capitol Rotunda. The embarkation of the pilgrims landing at Plymouth, Massachusetts, Governor William Bradford wrote, being thus arrived in a good harbor and brought safe to land, they fell upon their knees and blessed the God of heaven who had brought them over the vast and furious ocean, and delivered them from all the perils and miseries thereof, again to set their feet on the firm and stable earth, their proper element. Though half died that first bitter winter, Governor William Bradford wrote, last and not least, they cherished a great hope and inward zeal of laying good foundations for the propagation and advance of the gospel of the kingdom of Christ in the remote parts of the world. This, quote, covenant, quote, unquote, theology was held by colonial leaders. John D. Usden wrote in, quote, Natural Law and Covenant Theology in New England, 1620, 1670, end quote, Notre Dame Law School, Natural Law Forum, 1960, paper 47, says the idea of the covenant, that central permeating idea of Puritanism, covenanted men actually constructed political communities, the emerging, quote, American Charter, end quote, in the realm of governmental theory and jurisprudence. Names dominate the dramatis personae. John Cotton, influential minister of the First Church in Boston. John Winthrop, longtime governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. the founding award chief framer of the 1641 Body of Liberties for the Bay Colony, William Bradford, governor of the Plymouth Plantation, Thomas Hooker, preacher of the Potentate of Hartford, John Norton, official apologist for New England Congregationalism, John Eliot, evangelist and occasional political writer, and John Davenport, founder of New Haven. Political and social thought of early American Puritanism was drawn from the four sources: the Bible, the Covenant tradition and Reformation theology, the common law of England, and the long Western tradition of natural law, end quote. Puritans back in England intended to have a covenant government called, quote, Commonwealth, end quote. In 1649, led by Lord Protector Oliver Cromwell. After a decade, though, King Charles II was restored to the throne. Otis Guinness stated in an interview on, quote, Thinking in Public, end quote, with Dr. Albert Mahler, June 5, 2017, saying, the covenantal ideas in England were a lost cause. Sadly, they failed. The king came back, but the lost cause became the winning cause in New England, and covenant-shaped constitutionalism. The American Constitution is a nationalized, secularized form of covenant. A covenant lies behind constitution. The Protestant reformers of the 16th century, the perfect example of a nation with a, quote, covenant, end quote, form of government, was ancient Israel, a group of people in agreement with each other under God. The rights came from God, and they were accountable to God. In the 17th century, during the Age of Enlightenment, quote, covenant, end quote, evolved into a, quote, social contract, end quote, a group of people in agreement with each other, with or without God. In the 18th century, the French Revolution morphed, quote, social contract, end quote, into intentionally excluding God. Rights came from the group, and the people were accountable to the group. This culminated in a bloody reign of terror, 1789 through 1794, against those who resisted the group. Ironically, the group never really decides, but rather those who control the information and propaganda the group receives. And they give bullet points saying the country is controlled by laws. Laws are controlled by politicians. Politicians are controlled by voters. Voters are controlled by public opinion. Public opinion is controlled by media and education. Therefore, whoever controls media and education controls the country. The flaw of the social contract was displayed at the Nuremberg trials of 1945-1946, when the Nazi officials who killed 6 million Jews in the Holocaust defended their actions by explaining they were only following laws agreed upon by the people of Germany. To remedy this, an appeal was made to a, quote, higher law, end quote, namely, rules agreed upon by all the nations of the world. Eleanor Roosevelt proudly helped compose the UN Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. It listed rights all nations agreed on, such as freedom of religion and that women are equal to men, but nowhere did the document reference the Creator as the source of the rights. The naive of this effort was revealed when a UN subgroup of 57 Muslim countries formed the OIC, Organization of Islamic Cooperation, on June 30th, 2000. The OIC rejected the UN Declaration of Human Rights to embrace their own, quote, superior, end quote, Sharia Declaration on Human Rights in Islam, which allowed for beating women and killing the apostates. If laws are simply what a group agrees upon, what is wrong with them agreeing upon Sharia law? Secretary of State Daniel Webster defended the Judeo-Christian concept of, quote, covenant, end quote, at the bicentennial celebration of the Pilgrims' landing at Plymouth Rock, December 22nd, 1820, saying, there is a sort of genius of the place which awes us. We feel that we are on the spot where the first scene of our history was laid, where the hearths and the altars of New England were first placed, where Christianity and civilization made their first lodgment in a vast extent of country. Quote, if God prosper us, end quote, might have been the language of our fathers when they landed upon this rock, end quote. This is quote, we shall here begin a work which shall last for ages. We shall fill this region of the great continent with civilization and Christianity, end quote. Webster continued, the morning that beam saw the Pilgrims already at home, A government and a country were to commence with the very first foundations laid under the divine light of the Christian religion. Our ancestors established their system of government on morality and religious sentiment. Whatever makes men good Christians makes them good citizens. Our fathers came here to enjoy their religion free and unmolested, and at the end of the 2 centuries, there is nothing upon which we can pronounce more confidently than of the inestimable importance of that religion to man. Daniel Webster concluded in 1820 address, "Whoever shall hereafter write this part of our history will be able to record no lawless and despotic acts or any successful usurpations. His page will continue no exhibition of civil authority, habitually trampled down by military power, or of a community crushed by the burden of taxation. He will speak of that happy condition in which the restraint and coercion of government are almost invisible and imperceptible. Let us not forget the religious character of our origin. Our fathers were brought hither by their high veneration for the Christian religion. They journeyed by its light and labored in its hope. They sought to incorporate its principles and the elements of their society, and to diffuse its influence through all their institutions, civil, political, or literary. The Plymouth Rock Foundation was founded in 1970 with the mission to make more widely known and understood the Pilgrim principles and characteristics, their devotion to God and the Bible, to freedom and to tolerance, and their embodiment of courage, brotherhood, and individual moral character." Dr. Paul Jehiel, if I said that correctly, sorry, executive director of the Plymouth Rock Foundation, whose ancestors were on the Mayflower, wrote, quote, "Mayflower Compact Day," quote, Plymouth Rock Foundation's E-News, November 2011. He says, "We remember when the Mayflower Compact was signed on board the Mayflower while it laid anchored in what is now Provincetown Harbor, November 11th, 1620. A compact is a covenant. Since the Pilgrims were children of the Reformation, their view of covenant came from the Bible. It was God that initiated the concept of covenant first with Adam and Eve, Genesis 2:15, 17, and 2:24. God also made a covenant with Noah in Genesis 9, and of course, the process of cutting covenant was depicted in visual form for Abraham in Genesis 15. Throughout the Bible, covenants were used both vertically with God directly and horizontally with humans to depict God's process of bringing people into unity with Him and one another. Unity of purpose and harmony with God set the highest ideals for good behavior. Dr. Jill continued, "No wonder when Pastor John Robinson sent his farewell letter to the Pilgrims upon their departure in 1620, knowing that they would need to form their own civil government, he gave this sound advice." This is quote, "Whereas you are become a body politic, using amongst yourselves civil government, and are not furnished with any persons of special eminency above the rest, to be chosen by you into office of government, let your wisdom and godliness appear not only in choosing such persons as do entirely love and will promote the common good, not being like the foolish multitude, who more honor the gay coat than either the virtuous mind of the man, our glorious ordinance of the Lord," end quote. And so the question the founders wrestled with was, does power flow from the Creator to the King to the people, or does power flow from the Creator to the people to the representatives? And I think I'll stop there. So that's what I'm saying. Foundations come from the Bible, Christian thought, Hebraic tradition, godless secularism and humanism and all that stuff. All that stuff is failure. The failed enlightenment, I guess I would say that. I want to stop reading. Just wanted to make a quick video, but now I'm gone way over. So hopefully I read enough to prove my point that the correct view of America is with God, right? Her correct identity is the American Israel of God, or the American Zion. How it is once again built upon the Bible, biblical theology, right? So it's not really mythology or just some idea. It doesn't come from human enlightenment. It comes from divine enlightenment. And so, yeah, I'll just end it there. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. If you like my videos, please like and subscribe. Thank you. God bless.